think about God, I talk about God, always I'm wondering, is there a God? But some counsel me, all your thoughts and talks about God are in vain, because, they say, God cannot be known by reason. God can be known only by faith. So now I wonder, what is faith? I imagine descriptions of faith, an inner conviction that the deepest truth, the reality of God, escapes reason. An absolute certainty that specific religious doctrines are absolutely true. But describing faith is one thing, having faith quite another. How could faith work? I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and Closer to Truth is my journey to find out. I start to study faith, then worry, is studying faith self-contradictory, an oxymoron? I find in the New Testament, the book of Hebrews, a definition of faith. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the convictions of things not seen. Simply put, the biblical definition of faith is trusting in that which you cannot prove. But how can such faith be actionable, practical, workable? Would I want to have such faith? Honestly, I'm not sure. But I do need to understand such faith. This I am sure. I trained as a scientist, and I think as a scientist, and the way of thinking of science seems to be the polar opposite of the way of thinking of faith. So I begin with a man of science who became a man of faith. Alister McGrath, with a doctorate in biophysics, is now professor of science and religion at the University of Oxford and president of the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics. Alister, I want to know whether God exists. Some friends tell me that I'll never find answers with a rational approach, that I must have faith, and without faith, I will go nowhere. But to try to have faith scares me, because it's like putting myself in an emotional framework to reject rationality. And because I want to believe, I worry about fooling myself.
But the point I like to make is that you already believe lots of things. Things you can't prove, but you believe to be right. There may be moral views, maybe political views, but the nature of life is simply such that there are many things on which we base our lives that we just can't prove to be true.
Sure.
So I think we can relax a little bit. Actually, we realize that life is about faith very often, trusting this is right, but not being able to prove it. It doesn't mean running away from reason. It just means not allowing ourselves to be imprisoned by reason, which actually very often is quite limited.
Look, I can accept that completely. And I know that proof doesn't exist in all facets of my life. But the faith I'm required to have for God is of a different character than the uncertainty of my politics or my view of economics.
Faith is a cognitive thing. It's more than that. It's about trust. It's existential. But to begin with, it's cognitive. It's saying, look, I think this way of looking at things makes most sense. Here's the evidence. Here's what I observe in the world around me, in my own personal experience. What's the best way of making sense of this? And my own view is that I think a God such as the Christian God actually makes a lot of sense of things. But you're right, there's more to it than that. It's not just saying, I think this is right. It's much more, this is something I trust. And in many ways, I think that's a core element of faith. Not simply, I think it's right, but this is a rock on which I can stand. This is something that gives dignity, stability, purpose, and meaning to life. And that really does lie beyond proof. But that is why it matters to people. It doesn't matter to me. I might believe Queen Victoria died in 1900. I'd be wrong. She died in 1901. But it makes no difference to anyone. But if I say, I believe there is meaning to life, or I believe there is a God, actually, that moves us into different territory altogether.
And that's why I'd be even more scared that I would be fooling myself myself into believing something I want to believe about something so important, because if I'm going to have trust in it, then that's another leap of faith that I must take.
And you've probably taken such leaps of faith already, because as you rightly say, whatever you believe has consequences, and that's a frightening thought. These are indeed big questions, and they're frightening questions, but that's all the more reason to think about them, because they are such big questions. Actually, they may transcend the human ability to reach answers to them. And that's why I think we need help with some of these. What if there were a God who doesn't just exist, but gives us a helping hand along the way to discovering him? That would change the game completely. And that's why one of the most distinctive themes of Christian faith is that faith is about trusting this God, trusting this God's promises, holding his hand, I speak loosely here, in that he will lead us through life. For me, Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, gives us quite a nice metaphor for faith. It's about being accompanied as we journey. And that seems to me to hold together the idea of uncertainty about the future. We don't really know quite where we're going, but nevertheless believing that whatever life throws at us, we can hold on to this God who's going to be with us as we journey through this transient world.
Do you agree that I need two leaps of faith, the first being a leap to belief and the second being a leap to trust?
I think I would agree, although I would say that perhaps these are two humps on the same leap, if I can put it like that. But I think that there are many who would say, well, there probably is a God, but it makes no difference. And I think it's really moving from this might be the case to realizing if it is the case, it changes the whole game.
Alister seems quite rational about faith, which to me oddly sounds both contradictory and complementary. Contradictory in that faith, by definition, is conviction without assurance. Complementary in that I appreciate a reasoned explanation by which faith seeks to justify its freedom from reason. But from I appreciate, it does not follow that I agree. And certainly not that I accept, because I myself cannot see how to get to trust without first getting through belief. I should challenge the foundation of faith, argue that faith is glorified rationalization, a self-protecting, self-consistent system that immunizes itself against intellectual attack. I discuss religious rationalization with a Christian philosopher who tackles intellectual issues of God, Greg Ganssle. Greg, I would like to believe in God, and when I ask friends of mine who believe in God, they tell me I must have faith. Faith is a very hard thing for me to deal with. I'm not sure what it means. Do you want me to believe something without really believing it?
The question of faith is central because in our culture, in America especially, when people are pushed to the wall, they'll often say, you just have to have faith, as if that's an answer to the question. But I believe it's really an admission that we don't know the answer to the question. I think the real problem comes that when we use a sentence like, I believe in God, it's horribly ambiguous. We use the sentence, I believe in God, I believe in recycling, I believe in telling the truth, and we mean different kinds of things. So I believe in recycling doesn't mean I believe that recycling is good, because I could believe recycling is good and not recycle. It means I commit myself to some kind of practice. It means I actually recycle. I believe in telling the truth means I do tell the truth. I believe in God, I believe is ambiguous in this way. We can discriminate between what you could call believe that and believe in. I believe that God exists. Now, that God exists is a claim that's either true or false. And we believe it, and we can have good reasons to believe it or bad reasons to believe it. But when we say, I believe in God, it can often mean something more like, I believe in telling the truth. I'm committing myself to God, making God an important part of my life. Like, I believe in my wife. It doesn't mean only that I believe she exists, although I'm grateful that she exists, but I have confidence in her. I order my world around her in certain ways. So this ambiguity confuses lots of people. I think some religious believers are well-meaning, and when they don't feel like they can give you evidence that God exists, they'll shift to the other analysis and say you just have to have faith. And it doesn't really help you.
So where does faith come in either one? Believing that God exists or believing in God?
Faith, especially in the Christian tradition, is much more the believing in. Even in the New Testament, the word translated faith has a trusting component to it. It's more like what we did when we sat in these chairs. We committed ourselves to the fact or the claim or the hope that the chairs would hold us up. And we didn't just theorize about it. We didn't just analyze, is it probably true that the chair would hold us up?
We staked our rear end on it.
We staked our rear end on it. And that is much more what faith is. But what's interesting is that evidence can only take you so far. Ultimately, you have to sit in the chair to have faith in it. Whether God exists, the true or false question, that's precisely where evidence plays a role. And if you have good evidence, then and good reasons to believe in God, then your belief is reasonable.
How tightly are those two related? When you first think about it, you think it's almost the same question, and that I believe that God exists and I believe in God. But we're teasing them apart a bit.
Yes.
So as to I believe that God exists, I'm not quite sure.
Right.
But I want to believe in God, so I'm believing in the belief of God.
It's very important to realize that the true-false question, does God exist, is not one we are going to answer with absolute certainty.
Right.
Not because there's something funny about God, but because it's a philosophical question. And all philosophical questions don't lend themselves to this kind of
Well,
certainty.
to be fair, other exist questions we can. I mean, the moon exists.
Right,
I mean,
which is not a philosophical question.
Okay, so why is a God exists a philosophical question, not a more demonstrable question?
Because the object is not an empirical object.
Because the object doesn't exist.
Well,
No, I'm just kidding.
yes, if all existing things are empirical.
Right.
So just like human free will, the number 7 as an abstract object, objective beauty, like Plato believed in, these things require philosophical argumentation.
What do you do with the argument that says the whole basis of religious faith is basically a rationalization because you do not have evidence? You have to make a self-consistent system that is immune from attack. And the way to do that is you make up faith that says that faith is the belief in spite of evidence.
I think that can be a very serious objection. Now, the accusation of rationalization cuts both ways. This is reminiscent of Freud's critique of religion, that we're projecting on the universe the kind of universe we want. But of course, the atheists can be accused of the same thing. They don't want to be responsible to anybody, perhaps, and so they project meaninglessness onto the universe. And an argument like this that cuts both ways is not really very strong as a general argument. Now, we could look at individual people and challenge them. Are you simply rationalizing, or do you have reason to believe in God?
The religious argument may be this, that the reason God is hidden in a way is to enable us to develop faith, because if God weren't hidden, then we wouldn't need faith because we believe that God exists the way we believe the moon exists.
I don't find that strong at all, because I know that I can have confidence that something is true, and there's still room for me to act on it. For example, I am confident that recycling is good, but it's hard to commit myself to washing out the milk jug. So there's still room for faith, even if you did have certainty. So I'm not persuaded by that argument.
Greg's idea of faith, while strong, does not crowd out the importance of belief. And he rejects the notion, the rationalization, that God is hidden for the purpose that faith may flourish. To me, if there is a God, and if such God requires faith, then God's hiddenness seems essential. I meet a philosopher of religion who argues that the hiddenness of God refutes the existence of God, John Schellenberg. As a non-theist, how does John assess faith? John, I don't have faith. And I don't want to work up faith. If I did, I wouldn't trust it. So how do we deal with the relationship between faith and true belief?
When somebody says you should have faith, they presuppose this is something you could do if you tried hard enough. Whereas belief, by which I mean believing that, in this case, believing that there is a God, for example, which is often what they wish you to do, isn't something voluntary in that way. It's not something you can do just by trying to, right? I mean, otherwise we could solve all kinds of problems, personal problems. You know, I feel unhappy, well, I'll just believe that I'm happy. Or I feel like I'm too fat, well, I'll just believe that I'm skinny. No, it doesn't work like that. One way of approaching the issue is to say this, well, let's look for something that is voluntary. And let's notice that faith ought to be voluntary because, among other things, it's supposed to be something for which you can get some credit. In religious traditions, faith is often thought to be meritorious. Well, I think it's only possible if we understand faith in a new way, as at least not requiring belief. I think that faith can come in a belief-shaped package, but that you can also have faith and have it in a way that allows for it to be voluntary and meritorious without believing at all, by having a certain imaginative response to the world instead. Take any proposition. It doesn't have to be a religious one to begin with. I might have faith that my son is going to make it through a very difficult illness, okay? And often I need faith precisely when I don't have belief, because my son, the doctors tell me, may very well die. And so I don't believe that he will survive, but I have faith that he will. How could that be possible if I don't believe, unless faith can consist in something else? What else might it consist in? Well, I think you could describe your situation this way. You're willing to imagine the world in such a way that it includes your son getting well. Even if you don't believe it, you imagine it. And you're willing to put yourself mentally behind that possibility. It might be something that you need in order to sustain yourself in the process of caring for your son, for example. So this is a case where faith clearly needs to exist without belief, and I think it really clearly can if we allow for a non-believing sort of faith commonly. Okay. So why don't we apply it to religion? For example, if you're thinking about theistic faith, imagining the world as one in which there is a God. Now, I myself am opposed to that sort of faith because I think there is no God of that sort. In order for faith, even this voluntary sort, to be sustained, you have to think there's some chance, at least, that the proposition is true. But
I could put myself in that category. I think there's a chance that there is a personal God.
And as you said earlier,
but I don't necessarily believe it. I hope it. Yeah. And so maybe I have faith. Maybe what I tell my friends that I don't have faith, maybe I was lying. Maybe I really do have. Maybe I have better faith than they do.
Exactly, or at least
I have your kind of faith.
A better version of a voluntary sort of faith. I mean, when you ask them, why are you still a person of faith, they might have to point to things that aren't voluntary at all, but rather, formative factors of their youth or something of that sort. You have decided, perhaps, to take on board this proposition when there were alternative possibilities available to you.
You're making me feel better. I feel good.
You imagine the world as one in which there is a God, and you mentally consent to that in the sense that you allow that to have some power in your life. So you also choose to act accordingly. Now that takes us to another kind of faith. What we've been talking about so far is just faith that. For example, faith that there is a God, a response to a proposition. Faith in God involves acting on the proposition, acting as would be appropriate.
Yeah, that I'm not sure what to do.
Well, exactly. So you need to think about that. And you need to think, now, what would be appropriate? What would be appropriate behavior if there were a God? Now, a lot of religious people will say, well, you can't do that behavior yet because you don't believe. My position also asks us to look askance upon that view and to say, well, look, why not? If I'm willing to take on board this proposition in a positive frame of mind, in hope, I mean, I'm not opposed to it at all. In fact, I'm very strongly in favor of it, as much as you are. I want it to be true. And if I'm willing to act accordingly, as if it were true, shape my life in that way, am I not perhaps even worthy of more praise than you who believe involuntarily without having to work at it?
So you have hope for me?
I have hope for you, yes.
John does not believe in a traditional God, yet, because he himself seeks ultimate meaning, he can offer advice to prospective believers. Faith before belief is okay. Keep a positive frame of mind. Act accordingly. Me? I'm just not ready for all that. Intellectually, I can get myself there. Emotionally, I'm still not comfortable being there. I return to my basic problem. Understanding faith is one thing, making faith work quite another. Can faith be intellectually acceptable? I ask a Christian philosopher who appreciates this legitimate question, Edward Wierenga.
The question of what faith is and how to get it and whether it's important, whether it's okay, whether it's intellectually acceptable, those are all really important and really difficult questions. And I wish I had a really straightforward and simple answer. I'll rule out a few things. I think faith is not something that's contrary to reason. It's not like, well, faith is believing something that you know ain't true. People that have faith have something that's provoking it in them or leading them to it, and maybe it's even a kind of evidence, but I certainly don't think whatever it is they have is something that's so easy just to hand to somebody else and give them the same evidence and they'll get in the same position. I don't know what it takes to get it. Pascal said, so go to masses and take the holy water and act as if you believe, and then you'll end up having it. That seems like a bad way to get faith.
Yeah, I as soon as you said that, I was heading in the other direction.
Right.
Only because if I did that and I felt faith,
right,
then I would doubly distrust it.
Right.
Because it's something that I had because of some emotional experience or some crowd effect or some projected desire or something that would, my rational self would then be more skeptical of the whole process.
Well, you started, though, by saying that you don't think you believe anything on faith, that your scientific background requires that you've got good reasons, good evidence for everything that you believe. And I guess I wonder whether that's true.
I'm not saying that that's true. I'm saying that I would like that to be true, and I would try to make that true. If I believe something and this evidence is not there, I'll say, well, I believe it, but I know that the evidence is not complete. But try to be very logical about what I know, what I don't know.
Some things I'm sure just seem to you obviously wrong, immoral to do. Yet there are people that don't agree with that, and it might be hard to reason with them. So that it's not clear to me that for everything that we believe, we have to have good, solid evidence or proofs or reasons in favor of them.
And I accept a cultural basis for morality, but if that same mechanism applied to faith in God, I would not like it, because I don't want my faith in God, if that's what I would have, being built on a cultural particularity.
Well, I think that what most people believe depends in both instances on the culture that they're in and what people around them think and so on. But just as if you can identify sources in American culture that lead you to have certain moral views, you could also be a moral reformer. You can find yourself having a firm moral belief that differs from the moral belief that you're raised with. And I think the same thing can happen with respect to faith in God. You could find yourself believing in a way that's different from your family or your friends or the people you grew up with. And something could strike you in the same way as, yes, this is right.
Is faith something that I can develop myself, or is it something that is absolutely essential that God placed in me?
As a religious believer, I think it is God placing it in you. And I don't know what you can do to make him act in the right way except to be open, to be willing. And it seems to me like the kind of quest that you were engaged in is exactly the kind of openness that would be the right thing, right attitude to have.
I can tell you I'm having fun, but I'm not sure my faith is getting any better as you as a believer might define it. What about as a philosopher?
As a philosopher, I don't know. It's a mystery. I mean, I find myself with faith, and it's similar to the faith that my parents had and people I grew up with, but in some respects different, in some respects influenced by other philosophers. I find myself influenced by all those people, but I guess I can't separate that from my philosophical life and don't know what it would be like without that life.
Believers pray, I will find faith. I appreciate that. Non-believers hope I'll quit fooling with faith. I understand that. I am trying as best I can to figure out faith. I seek ultimate truth. If that includes God, great. If that requires no God, so be it. Truth is what counts. What makes faith? Here's a sequence of 3 factors. 1. A rational understanding of extraordinary claims that cannot be proven to be true. 2. A willingness to leap over logic and believe beyond reason that those extraordinary claims are actually true. 3. A commitment to act on the belief with behaviors that may differ markedly from prior behaviors. I have hope, but not faith. I'd be frightened of faith. Maybe I think I have a different kind of faith. A faith that wants to have faith, a meta-faith. Am I any closer to truth?
For complete interviews and for further information, please visit closertotruth.com.